I hope Max Yield, if they ever see this, appreciates my unveiling of the Max Yield bin. I actually am super excited to use this thing. This is a professional monotub. So normally I use unprofessional monotubs like those ones back there, like these ones right here. Now I get to experiment with both a professional product and, you know, a homemade monotub product. Can you see that right there, that design? It does look strangely familiar. The reason that I started filming so early is because number one, I have to put these 0.22 micron sticky filter things inside of all of my newly created magnetic filter cover things here. There's a little ridge in there. And basically I just have to kind of adhere all of these in there. So I have to do that work. And I've been waiting to do this project for what feels like many months right now. Why have I been waiting for so many months, you ask? Well, I've been waiting for so many months because for some reason, the portobello mushroom grain jars that we made on this channel, way back in the day, it feels like at this point, they've just taken absolutely forever. I think they're about as good as they're gonna get. They haven't really changed any sort of appearance in a while. Button mushroom, as I like to call it. Grain jars here. They're about as colonized as they're gonna get. I've got 5 of these things. Now, I will be honest, I reached out to Max Yield bins and I wanted to sell them my magnetic covers, or I didn't want to sell them my magnetic covers. I wanted them to sell my magnetic covers for their bins. I swear, I'm not getting paid for these things unless you actually buy one from my Etsy shop in the description below. I asked him if he would do that for me, and he said that it would be too expensive, basically, to outfit 8 different things for all of the things. The cost of what I'm charging for, you know, 8 of these filter covers would be more than the actual bin costs. So from a business perspective, you know, it makes a whole lot of sense and everything like that. But he did offer to send me the bin because I told him I make videos and things like that. I told him I had a button mushroom project going on and I was going to be making some videos for that. And he, you know, he said, here, I'm going to send you a little package. I'm going to send you a bin. So another really cool thing about this is obviously it's black and white. And I mean, I could either put it right up there as sort of a topper. It's going to even kind of look like a little barn. Isn't that going to be cool? That's one of the thoughts that came into my head, how it's going to look like a little barn sitting on top of that shelf. Or I can clear one of these shelves right here and I can, you know, just put it back in there. All the mushrooms are over here and I think we're going to do the little barn topper over there, but that'll be saved for the end of the video. Did I cover everything that I wanted to cover in this little pre-ramble? I talked about how I'm doing this. I started recording because I wanted to get my lips flapping and get my practice out of the way while I started doing this. I wanted to get kind of feeling natural because I've been waiting for so long for the button mushrooms to come along, or for the baby button mushrooms that we've had in our grain jars sitting on the shelf. Why can't I get this last off while I'm saying this? Every once in a while, the sticky part will get stuck on this plastic here, and I have to kind of like, it'll rip the whole thing off and it'll waste the filter. This is actually the biggest part of the step. This is what's called the spawning to bulk stage of our button mushroom project. We've put our baby mushrooms in our grain jars. We've let them colonize these grain jars until they became nice and not as snowy white as I was thinking, to be honest with you. But I guess that's just how this button mushroom portobello strain goes. The important part is that these grain jars are finally ready, and it's finally time to start our button mushroom project. Oh. So we've finally got our magnetic filter covers ready. The holes in these monotub bins, when I bought my iris bins back there, I had to actually drill a 2-inch hole myself. Of course, these professional bins come with the holes pre-drilled in them, same size, 2-inch on there. So you can stuff these holes in here with things like filter floss, or you can cover them with like micropore tape. We have these holes in the monotubs so that air can get in here, so that we can have what's called fresh air exchange. And basically what that means is that any living thing, this is how I understand it, any living thing is going to kind of be breathing, and it's going to be living in its little bubble. We're creating a nice sealed closed environment. In fact, the substrate that we're going to use to be growing these button mushrooms on is composed of a lot of manure. It's right over there waiting for us. I bought it on Etsy. It was like $30. It was a big box of manure. If I was going to be growing button mushrooms like on the regular, which I might, and I am actually surrounded by a lot of horse farms and things like that, I would probably just go and go to one of these farms and see if I could have some of their free horse manure, or at least, you know, cheap horse manure. But the nice thing about buying it on Etsy like I did is that it already comes nice and dried, and it already comes like, you know, nice and ready to go. Don't worry, we're going to be digging into this bucket. We're going to be inhaling all of the nice, you know, manure type scents and things like that. Basically what manure is it's just processed mushroom food, or at least that's what we're going to be using it for in this case. Let me get my things back on here. So did I cover why we actually are using these magnetic filter covers? We've got these fresh air exchange holes in the monotubs. That's so that, you know, the living, breathing things in the little bubble that we're creating, so that all of the gases and all of the, you know, just stuff that comes from life that's going to be created in there, so that all of that has a place to go. Not only that, but also so that fresh air can come back into the little bubble that we create and, you know, bring all of the oxygen and the things like that that all living things need. We want to have those holes that allow that process. We want to have them filtered out so that nothing nasty that's flying around in our air might get in there. We're not actually going to use any of this stuff in here, but I do need to clear it out and get it out of here. So let's go through all this other stuff that they sent me. I haven't even looked at it myself, to be honest with you. We've got some sterilized grain. So this is basically the same thing you would use to create the grain jars that we created over there. We have got some never grown mushrooms, dung-loving mushroom mix. So this is basically another pre-mixed version of what we're going to be creating with our manure and some cocoa fiber. You could also use these, but we want to learn. I want to make it myself just because I like to know what my mushrooms are growing in personally. But for a lot of people, you know, these pre-mixed bags are perfect because you don't have to do a lot of work, and you can kind of just get the idea of if you actually like it in the first place, or if it's something that you want to dive even further into. Oh, look, even a third sheet of those. The other thing that I'm particularly excited about that comes in this bin, because it's different than what I use in my monotubs over there, is this little plastic liner. There's two of them, but I'll probably just leave them stacked up. This little plastic liner is, I don't know, I think it's just going to be nice. It's going to keep everything nice and clean in here. It's going to keep all of the substrate out of those cracks and those crevices, and it's something that I haven't had the luxury of using in my homemade DIY monotubs over here. I usually just kind of put the substrate right in there, and it's going to be kind of cool to see the difference about using these trays versus just having them in the tub. Again, just another little neat experiment that we get to play by using a professional bin versus my own homemade bins over there. Now there's one other thing that we want to do before we actually get going with this, and I bought it specially. I can't believe I actually paid as much as I did for tape, but come on, there it is. It's right here. I think I paid like $30 or something ridiculous for this. Let me get the light on it so I can show you. This is just some black micropore tape. You can buy just some regular micropore tape. Micropore tape is the same thing as these filter covers. And normally it comes in like this white kind of like, I don't know, masking tape kind of look. And I wanted to have black tape to match the black bin. So I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I paid like, I think it was like $25 or $24 or something for this little roll of black micropore tape. But I bought it specifically for this project. So you're welcome, Max Yield Bin. Let's put the lid on and get this thing settled. I'm also going to spray the inside of this bin down with isopropyl alcohol before we get going. But I've kind of started this whole little vibe of getting our future tiny world set up for our button mushrooms. So I'm just going to continue down this path. We're going to put our black expensive micropore tape. I just want to cover all of these little holes. This is another difference in these bins. Let me get you a good shot of that. It's got these little holes all down the outside of this. And this is just to aid in, again, a little bit more airflow in the bubble here. But because its holes just open to the outside world, we want to make sure that we cover it with tape. So right from the beginning, hold on, I probably should be recording this. So I want to give a good stretch. Actually, maybe I can't do this with one hand. I just want to do a nice little stretch of tape right down the end of this thing. And this will keep those holes covered up so that none of the nasties can potentially get in there. One of the reasons that we're a little bit more hesitant about contamination on our button mushroom grow like this one is because the substrate that we're going to be using, because it's composed of manure, mostly. Basically what manure is it's full of food for mushrooms, but it's also full of food for other things like the molds and all the bad things that can ruin our mushroom grow as well. So because we're using a substrate that's particularly juicy, in fact it's very similar to our cordyceps projects over there where we were using like a super nutritious substrate. I don't know if cordyceps are supposed to have all that little black stuff in there like that, but it's an experiment. I don't really want to find out. We'll just wait to see if we'll wait to see if little cordyceps pop up. But nonetheless, we're also going to be using a super nutritious substrate for these button mushrooms. Yeah, buttery. There's going to be a phase where these baby button mushrooms are colonizing the substrate that we're putting in this bin down here that we're about to get to. So the first part of that phase is going to be when these baby mushrooms are colonizing that substrate. They're going to be spreading throughout it. They're going to be taking over. They're going to be realizing that it's a new environment, and they're going to be starting to make it home. In that phase, we're going to have all of these different filters that we put on here. We're going to have them covered up. So I've got even more covers waiting right over here. And the reason that we are actually covering these up is because we want less airflow during this phase. We want as little airflow as possible. That one's not working for some reason. Okay. Technical difficulty. I have to replace. This must be one of the old magnetic filters that I made that had the reverse polarity on it before I actually discovered the little tool that you can use to create that. Ooh, that was a real test of my newfound not freaking out when I'm making videos. But I got it resolved. There we go. It's embarrassing. Hold on, I need to get my magnets all sorted out. I made another intensely grave error, and I forgot to turn my microphone on, so I had no audio. Fortunately, I hadn't gotten too far. The mushroom is literally speaking to me right now, telling me to slow down, to chill out. It's just that the button mushroom project means so much to me. We're going to start where I think it left off. So now that we're spawning our baby button mushrooms to bulk, we're going to be creating a substrate that we're going to put into our tiny little ecosystem here. And during the phase of when these button mushrooms go from this grain jar right here, we're going to have two different phases of the little ecosystem that we're creating. The first is going to be what's called the colonization phase. So the substrate that we put inside of the monotub here, it's going to be full of the baby mushrooms in the grain jars that we created. And during the colonization phase, the baby mushrooms are going to be spreading their little myceliums, or their little baby mushroom fingers, throughout the substrate in the little ecosystem that we're creating. So during that phase, we want to have all of these fresh air exchange holes that we've got in the side of our monotub. We want to have them all covered up because we want as little fresh air exchange as possible during this part of the process, during the part of the process where the mushroom is actually taking over the substrate that we're about to create. Now it's sort of like a debated topic, although I'm finding that everything mushroom related on the internet is a debated topic. Some people say you don't need to go through a colonization phase where you cover all the air holes, and they say to just leave them open to the air right from the beginning. Others say that it is important. Others say that for some mushrooms it's important and others it's not. For our purpose and for our button mushrooms purpose, we're going to use two different phases. We're going to use our colonization phase, and then once the mycelium or the baby mushrooms has fully taken over the substrate that we're going to create in there, we're going to take the covers off of our air holes here, and we're going to expose our little ecosystem to, well, at that point, an abundance of fresh air. And it's that abundance of fresh air that comes in that will inspire the baby mushrooms to actually turn from what's going to be originally like a milky white looking type substrate. Well, from there, it will actually turn into little mushrooms. We'll see little pins, and they go through a whole little process just like plants do, except it's sort of in fast forward, and it's even more fun to watch. And in our case with the portobello mushrooms, we're going to be harvesting them at the very beginning part of their fruiting phase. And it's the part where they're going to be little baby buttons right before they've kind of sprouted into the bigger versions of the button mushrooms, like the creminis, and then eventually into the portobellas and things like that. So just to recap really quickly, we're going to have two different phases. We're going to have the colonization phase, where we have all of these fresh air exchange holes covered. And then after that, once the baby mushrooms have fully taken over the substrate in here and it's ready to go into a fruiting phase, we're going to uncover all of these holes, and that will expose the tiny little world that we've created to the fresh air. And then hopefully soon after that, we have our first flushes of little baby button mushrooms. Now, button mushrooms or portobello mushrooms are what's called poo-based or poo-loving mushrooms. So this right here is going to be the recipe that we're using. I'll put it on the screen so you can take a good look at it. So now that you've seen the ingredients list on the screen, I want to talk real quickly about another thing that the mushroom has taught me in this whole journey that we've had together so far. And it's that the ingredient list is important, but you have to pay less attention to the importance of the amount of the ingredients. And you have to sort of learn to get a good feel for the substrate that we're creating. Now, before we get into our substrate, I'm going to remove my hoodie here because it's too hot. So for the substrate that we're going to create, it's going to be important to create something that we want it to retain moisture. We want it to hold water, because it's that humidity and it's that moisture and it's that kind of, sponginess that actually feeds the mushrooms and causes them to grow. That's their preferred environment. But we don't want like a soppy, soggy mess, because that's the things that what we call contamination. Things like mold, things like bacteria, that soupy kind of soppy mess, that's the stuff that those particular things that we're trying to avoid, that's what they love most. So we want to create a substrate that's got the ability to hold moisture and to provide a nice like spongy kind of place for the mushrooms to grow. But we're also going to use things like the cocoa core and the vermiculite over there to kind of keep it nice and light and airy, and avoid that soupy, soggy mess. Because our baby button mushrooms are a poo-loving mushroom species, it means that we need to enrich the substrate that we're creating for them. We need to add even more food throughout it. Now, there's a lot of mushrooms that you grow that don't require a nutrient-rich substrate like we're about to create in this video. But for these particular mushrooms, for our baby button mushrooms, they are what's called a poo-loving mushroom. So we need to add, of course, poo. And that's what that is right there. This is a container of manure or horse poo that I ordered from Etsy. Now, the benefit of ordering it from Etsy is that it's going to come all nice and dry and kind of ready to go. You can stick your face right down in the bucket, get a nice good inhale. It actually doesn't smell like poo. What it smells like is it just smells like taking a tour through a farm. If you ever went to a farm when you were in like elementary school like I did, but as you entered that barn and that nice kind of barny waft hits your face, well, that's pretty much exactly what this horse manure smells like. This is horse manure, just to recap. We've got our other ingredient here, which is going to provide kind of the water retention, is the way that I think of the cocoa core. And this is going to sort of give us that nice spongy texture that we're after. Now, what I did in this case, I've still got my stick in here from when I was mixing it. I took just a brick of dry cocoa core. This is a brick of cocoa core. I just took a nice compressed block of cocoa core like this. I broke it apart, I added water to it. I let it kind of fluff out, and then I basically let it dry and I stirred it until it became this state that we're going to be using in the substrate right here. But instead of buying the cocoa core in this brick and then doing all the work of hydrating it and then letting it dehydrate back down to this dry form, you can also just buy bags of it. It's just a little bit more expensive if you get it kind of pre-loosened. Now the next ingredient that we're going to use is our vermiculite right here. This is kind of like, think of it as like gravel or something like that. It's just like a nice light substance that can kind of add some fluffiness. A couple more ingredients that we're going to use. We're going to use these things. We're going to use some gypsum. I like to think of gypsum as sort of, I don't know if this is actually correct, but I think of gypsum as sort of how milk is good for our bones. Gypsum is good for whatever you think of the skeletal structure of a mushroom is. So we're going to add a little bit of gypsum into our mix as well. This is one other ingredient that I'm excited to use. This sort of came about halfway through. I was watching a video with a guy called Michael Sage, and he was talking about how he was doing some experiments with white clover seeds and poo-loving mushrooms. And although this isn't part of the substrate recipe, we're going to use this at the end of the process. You know, it is part of the ingredients list, so I figured I'd bring it out right now. You can think of your monotub as sort of like the earth, and then you've got the air surrounding it. That's the climate. Well, down here, right on the surface of the earth, you've got, you know, maybe about an inch above, you've got what's called a microclimate. And that's sort of the climate that's covering over the little baby mushrooms, sort of like a cozy blanket. So the idea is by having some of these clover seeds sort of, you know, adding to the little microclimate blanket above the baby button mushrooms, they'll help kind of push off some of that nasty stuff. So back to our substrate mix, we're going to do about half amount of cocoa core. We're going to do another half of our manure. We're going to do about maybe 20% of vermiculite. And then we're going to do, you know, a scoop or two of gypsum. I'll show you the ingredients one more time, but again, one of the things the mushroom has taught me is to just sort of play the ingredients by ear. So really what we're going to do is we're going to take our bucket, we're going to start scooping this stuff into it, and we're going to feel it out. We're going to wait until the mushrooms tell us that the ingredient mix is perfect. So let's start with the most nutritious ingredient of the mix, which is our manure. Again, this is horse manure. And I'm going to put, I don't know, the recipe called for 20 cups. We're probably not going to use that much. I'll probably use about 10 cups. I usually like to fill the bucket to about, maybe we'll fill it to about here when we're done. And also keep in mind that manures are going to come in all shapes and sizes. This particular one is going to be full of, you know, a lot of hay and stuff like that. You don't even really have to pay too much attention to the specific ingredients because, you know, poo-loving mushrooms love all sorts of different poos. You can even get exotic poos that I've seen online, like from elephants and giraffes, and I think zoos sell this stuff. Anyways, I think that'll do for our manure. Now let's actually add some of our cocoa core. I'm going to move back here so I can remain in front of the camera in case I want to look back at you and say something insightful. But with our core, we're going to add about the same amount that we did with our manure. But keep in mind that this is a lot more, this has a lot less air in it. So it looks a lot more compressed. For our vermiculite, let's just grab a couple handfuls of this and add it and mix it until it looks, well, until it looks like it's distributed well throughout. We'll give it a little stir up like this. Let's try and imagine. All right, we've got that right there. We've got that big tub right there. We definitely don't want to have too little. So I think what I'm going to do is, because I've got enough, let's just add some more. And again, if the mushroom's going to teach you anything, let it teach you that this is part of the fun of the process. The digging into the bucket, the kind of stirring your hand around in here and getting a feel for what you're creating, you know, getting to appreciate the fact that you're part of what's going to create a little universe for these things, for these living beings. You're creating the ability for them to hopefully turn in to awesome little baby button mushrooms that we're going to consume. Have you ever wondered if the things that you consume actually become you. So maybe all of this like meat eating that we're doing, every time we eat a cow or a mushroom or whatever it is, they get to become a human. I'm not gonna say that's my belief or anything, but it is kind of a fun theory. I like to come up with fun theories and pretend that the mushroom told me. And then last but not least, there it is, hiding back there, is our gypsum. And for our gypsum, we'll do just a little, I like to kind of dust the top. Probably equivalent to a few cups in there. Give it one more good mix. Now that it's got the gypsum in there, it feels especially silky. It even has a little bit more of like a whitish kind of mycelium look, if I do say so myself. Give it one more mix far away. And just to prove to you that I'm mixing this up. Good, I want to distribute all those ingredients. I want to marry everything together is the point of this part of the process. Get yourself a good look at our pooey button mushroom substrate here. Okay, now this is going to be the tricky part of the process. It's going to be the part of the process where we bring the substrate to what's called field capacity. Now, field capacity is where I've screwed up in the past. It's the reason that I lost my king oyster tub right there, and it's the reason that I might lose my chestnut mushroom monotub right there. Bringing your substrate to field capacity basically just means adding enough water to it to where you can squeeze it and there's just a tiny little bit of moisture that you can put out. You don't want it to kind of, squeeze out into a stream, but you want it to basically be as saturated as possible without being oversaturated. We're basically putting the water into the oceans of the monotub environment that we're creating over there, because the water that we add into the substrate here, when we bring it to field capacity, that amount of water, we shouldn't have to add any more to this monotub in the entire lifespan of these mushrooms. There's a lot of debate online on whether you should open the lid and you should spray it down and you should fan it and all that sort of stuff. But I like to follow a method. They call it neglect tech. I like to call it just, keeping things as simple as possible. And basically what that means is touching the little environment that we're creating for our mushrooms, touching it as little as possible. So the amount of water that we add into this substrate right now, that's going to be the total amount of water in this thing for the longevity of it. You know how they say that water never disappears, that it just kind of goes from the oceans up into the clouds and then rains back down into the oceans, and continues in a big cycle like that? Well, that's basically what we're creating by bringing our substrate to field capacity. Is we're filling the oceans of the environment or the climate that we're creating back there. We're filling the environment with moisture. So for this, I'm going to use that, but let me get some gloves on my fingers before I get going. This part of the process might get a little bit messy. I was honestly expecting the manure to smell a little bit more. It was surprisingly nostalgic and fun to sniff that. It's been sitting in this bin over on the shelf for so long that I kind of I haven't even cracked into it. So I've been keeping it all for us. All right, we don't need to spray ourselves down with isopropyl alcohol or anything at this point. The next step is actually going to be sterilizing this substrate that we're creating. But just to kind of keep things clean, oops, I'm putting my glove on backwards. That's why it won't work. Just to kind of keep things clean. And because we're going to be digging around in this bucket here and kind of bringing everything to what's called field capacity, I'm making the decision to glove up. That's what I'm saying. So my recipe said about 12 cups, but I'm just going to dump some in here and play it by ear. We're going to dump little by little, and we're going to mix it up little by little until we hopefully don't exceed that thing that I said was called field capacity. We want to be able to squeeze and see the moisture in our substrate, but we don't want it to be dripping wet out of there. Got a little bit in here. I'm going to get in with both hands. This is why I said this part of the process was a little bit messy. Gooey aromas are really coming out now that we've got a little bit of moisture in there. And one of the things that I've learned is that water goes a long way when it comes to these substrates. At least when I was beginning, you always think that you need a lot more water than you actually need, because field capacity actually, if you don't know what you're really looking for, by the time you actually notice that the substrate that you're creating is wet enough, it's usually too wet at that point. So that's why I really like to go little by little. I like to add just a little bit of water at a time. You can let this part of the process take as long as you want, but it is important to not go too far. You can add more moisture to the substrate, but it's really hard to it's hard to take moisture out without sitting and waiting for a long time. We need to mix it up a little bit more, so it's not too bad, but we might even be at the point where we don't need much more water. We'll see together if we can get some water out of here. Oh man, just a drip. You can see on my hands, I can get a drip out of there. So I think we're about good. One more good mixing. Really put my weight into it this time. Make sure all of those little bits are in there. And take your time with this part. You're creating a tiny world here. Remember that. It'll also make the process more enjoyable. But you know what? I'm sort of finding that these mundane tasks are my most favorite things to do in life. Because you know why? Because I get to assign the importance that I want to them. It doesn't have a pre-built-in, this is super important for this reason. It's just kind of mundane and dumb. And I get to make it as important or as least important as I want. There's another lesson the mushroom taught me. Let me give you one nice up-close view. I don't want to grab the camera because my hands are all covered in poo. But I do want you to see what it looks like now that it's nice and brought to field capacity, nice and saturated, but not oversaturated. That is the point of field capacity, and I feel pretty good about it. I feel like we achieved it. So now we have to move on to what's called the sterilization part of the process. I've got these silicone, they're sold on like Amazon as oven bags. Basically what these are used for is they're used for, I don't know what people use them for. I guess they put like food or something in them. And they have the ability to go into the oven, but we're gonna use these oven bags to keep everything nice and clean, nice and together. And we're gonna be doing what's called pasteurizing our poo substrate or our pooey substrate. Now what we usually do with a mushroom substrate is we throw it in the pressure cooker and we pressure cook it for 90 minutes at 15 psi. But because we're using a pooey, because we're using manure in our substrate, we don't actually want to kill all of the stuff, all of the food for the mushrooms that's living in that manure that came out of the horse's bum. When he pooed that stuff out, we actually don't want to kill that. And if we pressure cook this at 15 psi for 90 minutes, it'll kill all of the nutritional stuff that the mushrooms are going to use that's in this substrate. So instead of pressure cooking it, we're going to do what's called pasteurizing it. And basically what pasteurization means is we're going to bring this substrate up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to just let it kind of simmer at that temperature for 2 hours. Maybe we'll become pasteurization experts. Okay, let's get our last scoop into the bag here. Squeeze that down a little bit. Pull it out. Show you what we're working with up here. This is our big silicone oven bag full of our manure, full of our manure-based substrate for our poo-loving button mushrooms. And then these oven bags come with these little silicone ties that I usually forget to take out of the bag before I fill them up, so I have to dig back down in there and fish them out, but this time I remembered. There we go. Pressure cooker waiting for us. Package of poo delivered. Gotta grab this camera, but we're ready to pasteurize. So here we are back in the kitchen. We've got our pressure cooker, but just to reiterate, we're not gonna be using this as a pressure cooker. So I'm gonna remove this lid, and I'm just using the nice big pressure cooker pot. We just wanna add enough water in the bottom of our pressure cooker here to, we wanna kind of actually fill up quite a bit more. Let's go ahead and take our bag and we'll set it right down in there, and we'll wait to see when it feels good. I'm gonna wait till the water comes up Yeah, probably about halfway up the bag. I don't want it to take too long. Turn our burner on and get it cranked up to the max temperature. We want to get that water in there boiling again. So I've got a quick update. I made a bit of a mistake on the pasteurization process and I just wanted to correct myself. We don't actually want to bring the internal temperature of the mushroom poo bag that we created. We don't want to bring that up to 160 degrees. What we want to do is we want to bring the water to a boil and then basically maintain the water at 160 degrees for 2 hours. So the good news is that, but I wanted to make that correction because we're actually not trying to heat the internal temperature of the bag to 160 degrees as I previously thought. We're actually just trying to keep the bag in water heated to 160 degrees for up to 2 hours. I've been kind of being I've been weird in this video. I've been screwing up. There were so many screw ups in this video. There was my magnets in the first place. I did all of my magnet filter covers backwards, so that kind of threw me off track. Then the next thing that happened is I forgot to put my mic back on and I recorded a whole bunch of footage and didn't have any audio, so I had to back up. Fortunately, I hadn't done any crucial steps and I didn't have to like remake the substrate or anything like that, but I had to back up, make sure I got all of the information that I'd been talking about with the tiny little ecosystems and the microclimates and all of that stuff. I had to make sure I got all of that and babble back in. Then I realized, but fortunately caught myself, that we're actually just supposed to bring the temperature of the water to 160 degrees, not the internal temperature of the manure poo bag that we created. I'll give you a link below to a website that's got a lot more information on pasteurizing mushroom substrates and goes through all sorts of different processes and things like that. But for now, I do just want to comment and say, don't worry about it too much. If you screw up a little bit like we did, it's no big deal. You cut the temperature down, you realize you've already been pasteurizing that thing for an hour. It's totally fine. The internal temperature being 95 degrees, all of those beneficial bacteria and everything living inside that manure that we wanted so badly, it's gonna be just fine. And in fact, we're even better than before because we've got less time to wait. And the next time that we see each other, it's time to get our poo bag loaded up into our monotub back here, our max yield bin, or what is going to become the future home or a tiny little universe for our button mushrooms that are still waiting patiently over on that shelf. I told you that mushrooms were patient, and I told you that patience is the key to all of this stuff. At this stage in the mushroom's life, they're not quite as resilient as they're going to be. After the colonization phase, where they actually take over the substrate in this bin, that's when they're going to become as resilient to contamination as they can possibly be. But at this stage, after they've actually done their job and gotten strong enough to colonize the grain jar and all that sort of stuff, at this stage they're that much closer to being to having their defenses up against the contamination. But we do still want to be a little bit clean. We want to wear things like gloves. We want to grab some isopropyl alcohol and some paper towels here. And then just like any monotub, we'll set that aside and we'll give everything a nice good spritz down of isopropyl alcohol. I debated taking this plastic liner out of here, but I think I'm gonna leave it for now. And I think it'll be just fine. Let's get this lid a little spritz too. Even the filters. Now clean it all up before we actually introduce the mushrooms into their new home. Let's take a second to appreciate what we're about to do. Now that I say that, let's appreciate the fact that we are introducing our mushrooms into their new home at this point. Now these ones right here, these 4 or these 5 little jars that we did, these are the jars that we actually created on the channel, and they were taking so long to actually colonize that I ordered another strain or another liquid culture from a mycology lab, and I inoculated my own jars. And this one, colonized really fast. I'm gonna throw this in just because at this point, got even 2 more jars of our portobello mushrooms over there waiting. We're gonna give our button mushroom project the best fighting chance we possibly can. And we're gonna throw all of these grain jars in here, all 6 of those. But if I was to do this, I would feel pretty confident that I could get away with putting maybe 1 or maybe 2 of these in this monotub. So we're going to do a little bit more grain than I would normally use. But you know, if you're doing your own, you could probably get away with maybe just 1 or 2 of these little jars. In this chestnut monotub, for example, I used just 1 of these jars here, and it actually colonized pretty quickly. So, and now we're gonna grab our poo bag and give it a little squeeze. It's still kind of warm. And then what I wanna do is we don't wanna pour the entire contents of the bag into the monotub at once, because we want to save a little bit for what's called a casing layer. Pour the bag of our pooey substrate down into the bin here. Again, we want to save a little bit for what's called a casing layer. We'll go through that in just a minute. At this point, we're just trying to get our substrate down in here. But what I really love about this part is it's all of the aromas. It's actually everything together. It's getting my fingers in the substrate. It's the smells kind of wafting in the air, just creating this little bubble around us. I hate to be so dramatic about it, but it really is a pleasant experience. And, you know, dare I say, it's the reason that I do all of this sort of work. Let me give you a nice up close shot so you can kind of see how malleable it is, but yet it still, you know, breaks apart fairly easily. And there's no like visible wetness to it. That's an important thing, not having any like visible. Again, you don't want it to be like sopping wet. It's finally time to break into our grain jars. Where should I do the cracking of the seal? Up here or down here? I think I'll do one for each of you. Let's start with this one right here. This is the fun part. This is where we break in. Oh, and we not only clear up this jar. Oh man, you can't get into it though sometimes. Oh, not only do we open this jar for something new in the future. Let go to let in is what I call it. But this is the moment we've been waiting for all this time. So let's pour this one in. Came out nice and easy. Oh, finally. There you go. Nice view from up there. And we'll just toss that in as well. Oh, sometimes these jar lids are so hard to get off after a while. Now another thing that's important is the mushrooms are currently teaching me the importance of smells, and if you smell like a pickle smell or something like that, or anything other than just like kind of either nothing or just sort of like mushroomy nature, then it's probably not a good sign. This isn't a what's contaminated and what's not video, but give your jars a little sniff when you open them up, and if they smell bad, and if you feel that they're kind of a little off, just don't throw them in your bin because you don't want to waste all that time. Should have given that one a little sniff. You know what? If I'm being honest, this one does smell a little iffy, so I'm going to throw it back right there. All right, now that we've got our grain, let's get it all mixed up here. Once again, dig in, get our fingers. We basically just want to distribute all this grain evenly through the substrate here. Remember that we've saved this extra for a casing layer on top, which is basically just going to be a nice little blanket to put on top of all of these little bed of grain. I like to get into the corners and just sort of, you know, take my time evening everything out, making a nice flat layer. Keep in mind this isn't so important at this stage because we're still going to put a nice casing layer on top. But just give everything a nice spread through our pooey substrate. And I haven't forgotten about our white clover seeds. We're going to add those to the top of the casing layer. We're going to sort of sprinkle everything. This is going to be the finale to creating our substrate. For now, we're going to take the rest of the stuff that we've got in this bag here, and we're going to do what's called a casing layer, which essentially just means putting a nice blanket over top of our mushrooms. Now, I'm not exactly sure why we use a casing layer. What I like to think is that it encourages, it's sort of like an invitation for the mushrooms to climb upwards, to climb towards the pooey substrate where all the food is waiting for them. It encourages them to sort of reach up towards the top of the surface. And, you know, that's at least my thoughts anyways. This poo has been sitting in the bag for a while still, so it's It's a little warm to the touch, and it's definitely giving me that tucking the mushrooms in with a nice warm blanket kind of vibe. Take a look at how the mycelium has even grown into the lid of this jar. Isn't that cool? Keep looking over at the camera to make sure it's recording, and looking down and see if I'm wearing my microphone. And I just want to, I've screwed up so many times in this video. I want to make sure that we didn't screw things up. And now, as promised, we're going to do a little dusting of our white clover seeds. Fresh off the presses. I haven't even cracked the bag yet. And we're going to be pretty liberal with these clover seeds. Now, the reason that clovers, I was told the way to go, is because they're just, it has nothing to do with the fact that they're clovers specifically. It's just that these are really easy plants. They don't require much. They just don't require much care, and they'll grow into little baby clovers. So we can be more concerned with our mushrooms. They kind of fit into the whole set it and forget it mushroom vibe. Basically just turning the top of the substrate yellow with our clover seeds. I want to just pour them everywhere. Now normally, I wouldn't spritz the top of this, or I wouldn't spray down my substrate. Normally I would just trust that the amount of water that I added when we brought it to that max yield capacity, is that how you say it? Normally I would just trust that the amount of water that we added when we brought it to that max yield capacity was enough, and we wouldn't add anything else. But because I've done this, this little seed spread on top with our white clover seeds, I am gonna grab my mister here. And it's got RO water in it. Not that that's important, but it's just nice, clean water. If you can, I don't know, use distilled. Why do I say that? Because I make it and I want to justify it. Or I make RO DI water. But I want to give this a nice, just a little bit of moisture on the top to kind of, give these seeds something to, give these seeds a reason to start doing what seeds do. And then the best part about this monotub in particular is going to be not only that we're going to get an awesome harvest of button mushrooms, or we'll hopefully cross our fingers that we will. Not only can we cross our fingers that we're going to get an awesome harvest of button mushrooms, but we're also going to get to watch these little clover plants grow. And the inside of this tub is going to look a lot cooler than a normal tub. I will say that the bumpiness sprouting up on this chestnut tub, it is pretty neat, but it's not going to be near as neat as watching this tub full of white clover seeds grow up. And then hopefully little baby button mushrooms kind of poking up in and amongst the grass-like plants. I'm gonna give this one more little mix up with my fingers just to kind of push the seeds in a little bit. Just kind of work them in. Just like this. Nothing crazy, just as if I was like, walking along the way. This is mostly for my enjoyment, as most of this stuff is. Let's get these gloves off, which always makes your hands so stinking. They're never like as moist as you think, but they just kind of feel like they've been confined in those gloves. So that's going to wrap up the process of actually creating the environment that our button mushrooms are going to live in. Now it's just time to pop the top on, seal the deal. We've been as sanitary as we possibly could. We ran into some hiccups, but we overcame them. We overcame them all, and at the end of the day, we ended up with a button mushroom monotub. A button mushroom world, if you will. I've even debated calling myself the button boy at times. Let's have one more good spin of this thing. Now the most important thing to do is to basically set it and forget it. Practice our patience. Let this thing do its thing. Don't be opening the lid, don't be peeking in, don't be messing around with stuff, don't even be second guessing anything. This is the part of the process that's going to teach us what the mushroom's been teaching us all along, and that's to just be patient, to just wait, to even be okay with whatever happens out of this. If it screws up, if it falls to contamination, we'll have all of the lessons that we've learned, and we'll just try again. And if it doesn't, well, we'll get to watch little baby mushrooms sprout up. We'll get to pick those baby mushrooms. I'll probably make some videos about cooking mushrooms and all sorts of different things like that. The point is that we'll get to enjoy the excitement of watching these baby mushrooms come to life. So in the spirit of set it and forget it, let's pick up our mono bin and set it on the shelf. Today, if I have to be honest and recap the button mushroom spawning to bulk experience, I would say that I was tested in a variety of ways. I was tested in the making of this video because all sorts of issues were coming along as we went through the journey of that, and I was also tested. I was tested with the smell of that grain jar as we opened it. I'll be honest, I poured a little bit of it in before I noticed. It was the pouring of the grain into the tub that kind of gave me, I don't know, it's just a little bit of a sour waft